Welcome to the AgEmerge podcast, brought to you by Ag Solutions Network. Your farming challenges are unique, so your practices should be too. We're here to share emerging ideas, build connections, and provoke conversation.
Get ready to improve your soil, your crops, your livestock, and your family's livelihood. I'm your producer, Kim Chase.
And I'm your host, Monty Bottens. Thanks for joining us.
Today, we're excited to welcome our guest, Dr. Mike Bredeson, research agroecologist at the Ecdysis Foundation. Mike has been with Ecdysis since day one, and his passion for the work they're doing to change the way research and science interacts with farmers, well, it's just so evident. Ecdysis believes scientists have to become farmers to increase the relevance and the credibility of their research. In today's conversation, we talk about that timely, relevant research Mike and the team there are doing that makes a real impact in regenerative agriculture. Once again, we see silos coming down as scientists and growers work together to find, as they say at Ecdysis, concepts, practices, and systems that are scalable and transferable to other operations and regions. So let's jump right in.
Welcome to the AgEmerge podcast. Today, I'm blessed to be joined by Mike Bredeson with the Ecdysis Foundation up in South Dakota. Welcome, Mike. Glad you could be here today.
Thanks so much.
And what we like to do with our guests is we like to just start with an open book. Tell us your story, your why, what drives you, and what's kind of gotten you to where you are here today.
Woo. All right. Well, you should have booked me for longer than an hour. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, we can do two parts, no problem, Mike.
Great. Well, part one, many moons ago. No. I'd say a good place to start would be I went to college. South Dakota was the place that felt like home the instant I visited. The people were just out of this world. I grew up in Minnesota, and of course, Minnesota nice is the real deal. But I went out to South Dakota and just was sort of captured by the pioneering spirit and the wonderful demeanor of the people that I encountered at South Dakota and at South Dakota State. So yeah, it was they sold it real easy on me. So I went there. After my sophomore year, I was a biology major, and everyone was telling me, well, it's good to have some lab experience if you're going to get into the field of medicine or whatever you're thinking about. So I was like, okay, well, this weird place everyone called the Bug Lab was hiring. It was a USDA facility. So I went out and interviewed with some guy named Dr. John Lundgren. And they, for some reason, gave me an internship that sophomore summer. And it was the first couple days on the job working in that entomology lab under Dr. Lundgren and with his technician, Janet Fergan, and with a couple of people that were also technicians at the time and now have become absolute best friends of mine, Dr. Ryan Schmid, who's also on staff at Ecdysis now. So we've really hung together. But it was just those first couple days where we were out and about in a field and something was out in this field, something I never heard of called cover crops. I grew up on a farm in Minnesota, but we never heard of anything like that before. And my job was to simply go out there and count and collect insects. And all those years growing up on a farm, it's crazy to think I never had an excuse or an opportunity or was ever told to simply get down onto the soil, the very thing that is the lifeblood of a farm, the thing where I grew up, and dig around in the soil and just make slow, simple observations. And that's what I was doing, and it absolutely blew me away. I went from someone that thought that studying the human body, and I wanted to be a chiropractor. I thought that was so cool, but when I looked down there and I saw these relationships and these wars being waged, alliances being made beneath that layer of thatch on the soil surface, it was cooler than any sort of computer game, any study that any class that I had ever taken before. It was just so visual, so fascinating. It hooked me on day one. So from that point forward, long story short, switched focus in my major from being more human biology to more organismal and botany. Stuck on with John for the next couple years in that same entomology lab, doing incredible work, having an excuse to get out on all sorts of different types of farms, seeing what different farmers are doing across the region at the time, mostly South Dakota, meeting these, sort of just unique personalities and pioneers. It was awesome. And when John asked me to be a graduate student, I was like, oh, yeah, that sounds good. If you want to pay me to do a little bit of schooling, that sounds like a no-brainer. Went through my master's degree, and towards the end of that, John decided that Ecdysis, where I currently am now, this Ecdysis Foundation needed to happen. We always sort of had a spark that that in our minds that if we really wanted to do the great work that we wanted to do, we couldn't be where we were. We needed to be independent. So John started that place up, asked me to come on as his first PhD student. And 5 years later, a PhD later, and a lot of great work and progress later, here we are. Full-fledged scientists with Ecdysis. We're growing, bustling, and looking forward to a expanding, quickly, bright future. It's amazing.
So if I read it right, your official title is a research agroecologist.
That's right. Yep. Research
So
agroecologist.
that's what you get with your PhD, where when you're an intern, you're a bug counter. So
Bug
I mean
counter.
that is the
Yep.
entry level stage there, right?
That's it. Yep. It's a big leap to that next level,
Well, this is being a bug counter should come with a warning. If in one day's time there on your very first day, you can get so enthralled with it that it should contain a warning label there, don't you think?
I know it's a hazardous thing. It's like on the pack of cigarettes. This is going to be addictive. Just so you know. Just so you know.
Well, the bug lab at Brookings is an ARS lab, an entomology lab, and it's the main entomology lab for Agricultural Research Service in the United States, if I remember correctly. And
yes,
Dr. Lundgren, he was a part of that lab at the time when he was at SDSU there, and they did some pretty amazing things. So
we did, and it was really sort of that cutting edge of the knife type research at the time. Was no one had heard of cover crops, period. And to simply go out and after soybeans put a monoculture of a single cover crop, it was revolutionary. No one was doing that kind of stuff. Certainly no one was looking at the data and the science behind it. So we were doing some of the first work looking at the response of corn rootworms in corn following a cover crop, and some of that early research.
What were some of the results of that early research on the rootworm? This is interesting.
Yeah, it is. And John's a better person to ask because I was just a bug counter at the time. But basically what we did is we'd go out there, we planted radishes late in the soybean growing season, let them grow up. The next season, we'd have the farm manager plant corn. And then we actually infested the corn with tens of thousands of corn rootworm eggs.
That's nice of you. Yeah.
Kind of a wild thing to do. Don't tell the neighbors kind of a thing. That wouldn't make them too happy. But then later on in the season, take all sorts of soil cores and see whether or not you're having, elevated populations of beneficial predatory insects where you had the cover crop the year previous, and whether or not you could find more corn rootworm larvae in one versus the other. And really, we found some great promising results those early years when we really didn't know what the heck we were doing as far as establishing a cover crop and managing that system. But
you're back to what you're talking about, that voracious competition that goes on with insects. And what you're
Right.
doing is create the environment and create the food source to promote the, you know, insects that are going to use the corn, the eggs that you're seeding
Yeah.
in the soil. And so that was your whole purpose, right? To see if we can create the right environment to invite the beneficial bugs to take the pest bugs out of the picture.
Absolutely. And you mentioned it, right? Creating the home for the beneficials. And some people can be kind of intimidated, by thinking, well, you need to do all these insane things and make sure the environment is just right in order to get a healthy population of beneficials. And really, a person shouldn't feel that way because
And
it's
anything's better than nothing, right?
easy.
You know, and the
Like
more diverse you can be, the more rotation you can have is even better, right? But just a
yeah.
simple monoculture, very popular now.
And it doesn't take much because insects are, the most adaptable group of animals on the face of the earth. And really, that's just a, a telltale sign of how inhospitable we have made most conventional crop fields, is that just doing those simple couple things does make it, in fact, a hospitable place for those voracious predators, and basically gives them a home and a job. All they want is a home and all they want is a job. So that's all we have
Yeah.
to give them.
So a takeaway here is, hey, don't worry about doing nothing,
Yeah,
versus, just do something, right?
that's a
Try
great way.
something. Just do one step, and it makes a huge difference. The second, and the second step won't be as big of a difference as the first step. You have diminishing returns in this, just like anything else. But do something, right, in the cover crop world would be your takeaway.
That's Yes, yep. Worry about doing nothing. Yep. I think I'm gonna steal that from you and use that in the future. Why'd worry about doing nothing? Worrying about having something work is not, especially in those early stages where by now we have things figured out to the point where it's
Right.
pretty well foolproof with the information that we now possess out there. Anyone can do this, and it happens easily and it happens so quickly, which is also such a fun result of the research that we have done. Is that it's not 1 year later, it's
Mhm.
not 2 or 3 years later.
It's instant.
You do see returns increase over time, but the biggest advances that we see in an insect population happen in year one of cover cropping. So it's happens fast.
It's fascinating. Life begets life. So, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is a little bit of the Ecdysis Foundation, and you've been with them since day one when that started with Jonathan and such. And really, it came out of the result of and I'm going to say this, and it's kind of a summary of some of the things that Jonathan has spoke of from the AgEmerge stage. But research today at universities is driven by funding, because it don't have the internal funding to do it. And when we do a research study, we sponsor a grad level student, which generally means for a single study, $35,000 per year is our cost
Mhm.
to do that. And pretty much any university, that seems to be the number. It's a little higher in California, but when we're looking for answers out of that, we want to learn something. And so typically that's a product driven, right,
Mhm.
type of research study, because we want to have additional product sales to pay for that $35,000 a year times 3 years to
Yes.
pay the funding. So when you're doing systems research or practice research to plant a cover crop, there's the money's not there for that research. And so when you're looking at more holistic practices or systems, that requires a different approach. So taking that outside of the university into, or ARS, into a private foundation allows those stakeholders who are passionate about regenerative agriculture, passionate about ecosystem services, planet health, animal welfare, people health, to contribute to Ecdysis, so that you can do this type of research that just doesn't have a place. Is that a good summary of what makes Ecdysis different than university research? Is you're able to tackle things that are different because it's you're not, the revenue to do the research is from basically donation versus additional product sales?
Yeah, no, that's a fair summary. I'd say that a big difference that I have seen over the years is when we were completely grant driven, grant project driven. You see in the research world when you're applying for these competitive grants, it follows a sort of news cycle or something that parallels a news cycle.
Hmm.
If there's something that is new and sexy and getting a lot of attention, sure enough, that next year you're going to see loads of money for a very narrow subject, and everyone and their brother and sister are applying for the same types of projects and money to get the same types of work done,
And
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 people
every research,
adapting.
you know, and
Yeah,
they all have climate change component to them because that's a hot
sure.
button, or that's what you're saying, right? It's what's the news cycle worthy um,
That's right.
thing.
That's right. And the biggest difference, and it's such a refreshing difference because you don't have to sort of chase down something that perhaps in your heart of hearts is maybe driven not by genuine purposes, or from your communications with farmers and your work in the field that this isn't what we need to be working on. And it's kind of this, you have this sense of urgency and know-how of what you need to be working on, but no way of getting there because no one's willing to pay for it. And that's the difference now in the Ecdysis model, is that we can pivot to working on things that we believe are so important based on conversation that I have today with you, that I have at a field day with a group of farmers that are clustered together talking about a problem that no one's addressed before. And we can pivot to that and start making plans to answer those questions that day or the next day. We've got a group of farmers here that are all wondering the same thing. Hey, who's willing to host a couple of research fields? And that's the beauty. We don't have to spend this year working on writing up a grant proposal for that specific project, and then hoping that we find a granting institution that
Right.
kind of has a call for proposals that just kind of sort of fits the project, but maybe not quite as much. So it's a huge benefit that we have in our organization, is being able to move quickly and be dynamic.
So in addition to the independent portion of it, it's the speed aspect. Because like you said, if you wait, take all the time to create the grant proposal, which that's very time intense to answer all the questions and budgets and everything, and then you get denied, then you got to start over again. And
Yeah,
plus,
yeah.
it also gives you a more of a discovery opportunity, right? Because if you see something, you can just pursue it versus try to make it fit, like you're saying. So I think that's a novel approach, and it'd be really great if we could get back to that, in our research labs. It's just kind of gotten
You're right.
overtaken, hasn't it?
You're right. And it's what universities used to do. Researchers
Correct.
were out on the land. My great friend that I work with, Dr. Ryan Schmidt, he's a history buff. He talks about extension specialists, or not specialists, extension researchers or university researchers back in the day, hopping on trains and going from town to town on their tours to speak with farmers and understand their needs in their own fields,
Mhm.
and figure out what their problems were, right from the farmers' mouths, and being able to change their research program based on the needs of those farmers. That has since gone away, and we are succeeding in taking up that torch.
It's one thing to complain about a problem, but what I love is you guys are addressing the problem and provide a viable business model, if you will, for
Yeah.
that to work. So that's awesome.
We're taking a short break to share that the AgEmerge podcast is brought to you by the team at Ag Solutions Network. Rooted in innovation, ASN is committed to leaving the land better than we found it, not simply maintaining it. We're here to help you navigate the balancing act of productivity and building a legacy. From practices to products, ASN is more than a new jug. It's a new way of thinking. So don't be afraid to be different. be afraid to be the same. Contact Ag Solutions Network today at asn.farm. And now back to our show.
So let's take an opportunity to talk a little bit about some of the current research you've got going on with Ecdysis, some of the projects you're involved with, and just maybe some of the aha moments you've seen this year in your work.
Sure. And it's a great question, a fun one to answer, because at Ecdysis, we've got a load of people there. Some people are interested in graduate work. We've got a few graduate students, a couple scientists, and we're hiring on more. And at Ecdysis, we really like to see, we have big projects, with funding that need to be done, and we're all sort of all hands on deck on these types of projects. But in addition to that, we also have the freedom to let people follow their interests, and as a result, we get quite a bit of diversity in projects happening on right now. So we're ranging anywhere from people digging through cow pies, looking at the dung beetle community across a bunch of management regimes here across the Midwest, trying to figure out how different types of cattle management and rotations are affecting resources for pollinators on pastures. So that is fascinating work that's being done.
Now, Mike, there is one thing possibly worse than being a bug counter in a field of cover crops, and that is being the bug counter in cow pies.
I know.
I don't know if you would have had the same passionate response if day one was go count the dung beetles in cow pies.
Maybe that's something we introduce on day 2.
There you go. Right? But talk about with comparing management schemes and the dung beetle count across different environments and such. Why is that important?
Well, it is so important because, when a person hears, well, we need to get cattle back out into the pasture, we shouldn't, most people that think about this situation and understand land management and animal management know that animals ought to be out on pasture. Okay, well, that's a blanket statement that deserves a heck of a dive into, because there's no one way to manage animals, and there shouldn't be, right? So we've all these different types of grazing management styles, and each one of them results in a slightly different plant community. Okay, and what are these different plant communities? Are they dominated by grass? Is one style of grazing management going to promote more forbs, more legumes, these things that are really necessary for a beneficial pollinator community? Not just managed pollinators like honeybees, but also the native pollinator community, the flies and all the bumblebees and the ground nesting bees. So that's what some of the researchers, Ryan and Tia on staff, are both working on that this summer. Really excited to find out what they're going to find, because it has huge implications for not only the native pollinators, but South Dakota year on year is one of the biggest honey producers, and honey producers want to know when they're selecting their field sites to go to their bee yards to go drop their bees for the summer, if they can screen those pastures a little bit and say, hey, this person over here is utilizing this sort of, I don't want to say mob grazing. Ryan would probably, Dr. Schmid would yell at me for utilizing that, but adaptive management. I know that my bees are going to be healthier. They're going to have the resources and diversity, floral resources that they need in order to be healthy. Those are the questions that they're trying to answer now, and really finding some cool results. So next on your docket needs to be having a podcast with Tia and Ryan to talk about poop, pastures, and pollinators.
The 3 Ps.
Like
yeah. Bugs and poop, pastures, and pollinators. I like it. So that's one. What's some of the other studies going on? I know there's an almond study going on.
There's an almond study. We're also going to be starting some grape work in California also, as a follow-up to some of the stuff we're finding in almonds. The almond work. We had a graduate student, Tommy, out in California work on it for the last 3 years and do absolutely just groundbreaking research in almonds. There's not much work, if any, that had been done on regenerative almond orchards. Water's the big issue out there. So we're trying to take a multifaceted approach looking at all the dynamics of these almond orchards, how much water is being used in conventional versus regenerative almonds, looking at the soil physics, the soil chemistry, the bird communities, all of that on top of the insect community above ground, below ground, both almond pests and also the beneficial insect community out there. Fascinating work, especially for a bunch of folks that grew up in corn, soybean, wheat country. To be able to get out there and expand into some of these other crops is absolutely fascinating. As a farm kid, it's a dream to get out there and see, to see how our food is grown. When I sit down the longer that I'm in this career, when I sit down at the dinner table and I see almonds on my salad, or I see broccoli and I see all these different things that I'm eating, I say, since I've stepped foot in those fields, I know how they're grown. And it changes, not only how you feel about land management and how these different farms ought to be managed, but it really, you even go as far to change how you eat once you have exposure to these different places, and what they look like, and what you want going into your body, because you want to treat your body like some of these producers are treating their land, which is really, it's really amazing. I can't say enough for some of these producers, and we ought to be. I know we're going down a rabbit hole here, but the way they care for the land makes me want to care for my body and care so much that I look into what I eat, take it to the next step. I know that was quite a rabbit hole.
No, that's a great way to look at it. And, that's what as a farmer, with my farmer hat on, that's the way we look at it too, is not only does it need to last for generations, it needs to be not just producing an okay crop.
Yeah.
Kind of like when we were talking about with Jeff Moyer, he uses the term, if somebody asked how your marriage was, you said, "Oh, it's sustainable."
Yeah.
That probably wouldn't be too great, right? So you want it improving, you want it growing, you want it passionate, you want it living and changing over time. So I think that's it's interesting on how we approach that, but there's a direct link, and we know it, between the soil microbiome, the plant microbiome, animal microbiome, and the human microbiome, and that they're all interconnected. And we are what we eat. So it's, I think you're right on par there for being excited about seeing guys who are approaching soil from a different perspective, being excited about eating that food.
Absolutely.
And, there's millions of other people out there just like you. So it's an opportunity for farmers to connect with those people.
We try our darndest as a human species to sort of remove ourselves from nature and functioning ecosystems, and that hasn't worked out for us, because no matter how hard we try and battle that tide, we are always overcome by it, and it's just wonderful to have the privilege to go out and be a part of farms that have that realization, have made that realization, and are wholeheartedly incorporating their lives more and deeper into the natural ecosystem.
So back to other projects that you have going on as a group there at Ecdysis, that you're exploring, excited about. What are some other things happening these days?
Yep, other things that are happening. So more big picture stuff is we've got projects with larger food companies, food entities, groups that are interested in sourcing their ingredients for their products and their goods from farmers that are using regenerative methods, trying to fix carbon into their soils, trying to promote wildlife on their land, trying to purify and infiltrate water, recharge aquifers. Companies realize that consumers are becoming more savvy. They want to purchase products that are produced more regeneratively, and it's in their best interest as a company to to go out there and find the farmers that are producing these goods and purchase them, and hopefully purchase them for a premium because these farmers deserve it. And also it's in their best interest because farmers that are producing goods in these in this manner, in a regenerative manner, that's good. That's pretty good food supply chain security for these food companies because they know that these farms are going to be more stable in rough drought years. Down the line, they're going to be profitable, and yeah, they want a secure supply chain, and they realize it's a good business decision to go out and find these folks. So those are the kind of companies that we're also working with in many projects, going out, putting the numbers on the ecosystem services that are being provided by the farms that they source their ingredients from, and getting baseline data on farms that are transitioning to the regenerative model so that they can be included in this sort of food chain. They want to be included in the food chain in the future. They don't want to be left in the dust.
Correct. So
Those
I
are
think it's kind of an interesting paradigm that they're approaching because, you know, in the past we've had things where if you grow a certain canning bean, or if you grow a certain canning tomato, or a certain sweet corn, or whatever, there's a certain variety that they might develop for the farmer, right? And then the farmer plants it. There are sugar beets, for example. This variety, they work with the farmer on what to do, and then they buy it back. And then they have the organic approach where it's like, okay, you have an organic certification from a third party, and that's just basically you can only do these inputs. It's an input differential. But what's interesting about what the consumer is asking for now is it's the cultural practice, right? What is the impact of the management and cultural practices that you're doing? And the food companies picked up on that, and now they're trying to figure out, okay, well, we're not giving them the seed to plant, we're not a requirement of organic. So it's just this big question of what is regenerative? What is the impact? What does that mean? Because they're trying to create value, right, for what the customer wants. And I think it's really fascinating what you said about the droughtiness or drought hardiness of regenerative practices. That is true. And if you think about, they probably book a lot more acres than what they actually need. So if there is a drought, they have their consumer covered, right?
Yes.
So they're looking at making a more resilient system to where they don't have to, if you will, overbook on inputs. So that's kind of that's an interesting. So not only are they trying to create higher value product, but they're also trying to reduce their expenses at the same time.
Yeah, reduce their risk.
Mhm.
Yeah, they want to secure that supply chain. And you brought up something really interesting, which is to further on with this discussion about what we're excited for, is that we feel like, as researchers, as a research entity, if there's any holes in the research, we feel like we're not, conducting our jobs to our fullest ability, and in the research field, we're oftentimes pigeonholed, as a molecular biologist of, a certain strain of bacteria, or you're a carabid specialist. If you're an entomologist, carabid's a family of ground beetles.
I was going to say that's a specialized bug counter there. Yes.
Yeah, but that's the field, that's
Right.
that's the world we live in. And if you're doing a study on, as we were in the early days of cover crops, if you go out there, okay, count the number of spider families and number of carabid beetles, rove beetles out in this field that has or doesn't have cover crops, and I publish a paper. There you go. Wash my hands of it. Interesting. Cover crops. Eat more corn rootworm larvae. Wow, that's cool. But think of all the questions that ought to have also been addressed, in that
Right.
study. We need to know that the economic considerations.
Mhm.
What is happening to the soil when we're doing this study? We need to
Or
be.
because of that, you can raise a higher value crop with non-GMO or white corn, popcorn, those kind of things that are more affected by rootworms that maybe would not have been economically viable in the past. But because we changed this cover crop system, and when you change one thing, you change everything. We changed the insect community in order to allow us to do things we weren't able to do before.
Absolutely. And we couldn't agree more. And we feel like, our goal used to be, gosh, we're not going the full distance. We need to go out and tell these people that are going to be reading our research studies at least how the different plots yielded. Let's at least take it that far. But at this point, we're starting to realize, well, that's, yield's just a word. It's taken completely out of context if you don't, and doesn't mean much if you don't have that context. So we don't feel accomplished in a study unless we are going out there and we're also in coordination with all of the environmental data. We're collecting economic indicators from the farmer. We're collecting yield, crop prices, the market that they take to, and then even for a step further on top of that, and this is getting into more of the questions that I get really excited about for the future, is what is regenerative ag doing, not just on the economic side of things of a farm, but the social impact that it's having on that household, and also the economic and social impact of a community where that regenerative farm is established. Is it, and how is it affecting the local economy? Is it creating more jobs, more opportunities? So we start by counting bugs, and we're already to how creating an ecosystem that is highly functional for an insect community also translates to more groceries being bought and sold at a local, food cooperative, and people being nourished and people being happy and more fulfilled with their jobs.
Right.
It's quite, but that's the way research is headed. And in our opinion, holistic research needs to be that way. And if it isn't that way, it's lacking.
And the good part about it is, I think when you share that research and that holistic context of it, how it impacts everything from, the community down to the soil and yield and profit and such, I think it gives farmers an opportunity to exercise the art of farming. And I think it allows them to have fun again. So several of the farmers we get to work with comment about, wow, with a biological approach to farming, that farming's fun again. It's not just a recipe card that we got to run this tractor and spray this and do this, and then we repeat next year. It's dynamic, it's changing, and we're learning new things all the time. So it's great to be able to make that farming fun again. Thinking about making that farming fun again, how do you think some of the things that you've seen in your tenure here that has really helped farmers farm better? What are some things that you've seen with farmers that you've worked with to be doing things better?
Yeah, so it all begins with something that we've already brought up at the beginning, and that's starting. It's starting, and everyone's different, right? Some people, Dr. London would probably disagree with me on this, but I'll just give you my opinion. Is when people start relatively small, with a management practice that is manageable in their own mind, and it's not going to cause extra stress, but like you just mentioned, it might be something that could be actually kind of fun. When you have that first success, then farmers, it's like set it and forget it. They're the ones that are, pushing you after that first year of you trying to get them to do something, fairly simple. Maybe it's cover cropping or a pollinator strip, and the observations that they make from that point, especially if you can make those observations together and really understand and have the farmer understand some of the fun mechanistic side of things about why a certain practice is working. Gosh, they just take it and run, because it does become so fun. So that's and I see myself as being someone that can help in that conversation, and has helped throughout the last few years, or my tenure, as you said, at Ecdysis, is creating the comfort level for farmers that are skeptical to start a few things. And oftentimes it is when we're in that small group of farmers at a field day, and they're asking a question about cover crops, and said, let's try it out. If you want to know the answer to this question, there's only one way to do it, and that's to put the numbers to it. So can we do a little bit of a corner of your field? Can we do a small field, something that you'd be comfortable trying something with? And after that first year, hand in hand, making sure it works, going out there, counting bugs together, your phone won't stop ringing from that point forward with new ideas and topics. And can we try this research project this year? And it's really, it becomes overwhelming. There ought to be so many more, Ecdysis foundations out there to address these, because simply there's just so many questions to get after and answer.
Well, and that's really why we started this whole AgEmerge concept was, we knew that we only know so much as ourselves, but when we can reach outside to folks like you and Jonathan and reach to other farmers, other thought leaders, other researchers, other ag technologists, and just bring in all these different perspectives and shatter the silos instead of just being the one beetle researcher, really shatter these silos, we can learn and advance quicker and with more holistic versus individualized solutions. So
and individual, I'd like to bring up something you just mentioned there: individualized solutions. Farming, and I wrote a note about this, hoping that we would discuss it during the podcast. Is that farming over the last 100 years has become and it's so sad, but it's become an isolating profession. Farmers have, went from really leaning on neighbors for so much. I mean, community was so strong at one point. At least I think, I talked to my grandfather, and the amount of work and labor and equipment that was traded between neighbors when he was first starting out, it was remarkable. They couldn't do it without each other. And I'll use a word that you have used already. We've siloed ourselves, and independence is often brought up as being a good thing, a positive thing. But when it comes to farming and doing things as a community, we've really siloed ourselves as an agricultural community, and it's led to isolation. It's led to, when we have questions, we go to maybe some questionable, or we go to agribusiness that has that may have questionable motives, instead of going to our neighbors that may have gone through something very similar, and they've got other types of solutions or ideas or equipment or techniques that we might be able to use. That community aspect, which used to result in pseudo farm cooperatives amongst neighbors, has eroded. And I really think that regenerative ag is a pathway towards reestablishing those farmer networks and communicate webs of communication between farmers. And you see it when you go to a soil health field day. You see it when you go to some of these meetings, is that, my gosh, the communication that happens there, the network that's being built, the spider web, every strand is just getting more and more complex. And what I'd like to see is regenerative agriculture accepted and practiced on a level where physical localities within locations, within counties, there's enough of a groundswell where farmers can get together and bounce ideas off of each other. And it's happening in a few places all over the country. And when I see that community happen, it's sort of like the edge of the waterfall. Things move fairly slowly, and thoughts take a while to develop, and you have a lot of second guessing yourself. when the water's moving slow, when you're isolated. But when you have that network of people, those thoughts, those ideas, that innovation happens at such a more rapid rate because you all of a sudden have the community support. You also have the infrastructural support of that local community. And it's really what we need if we're going to see regenerative ag adopted on a wide scale. We need to create these local communities. Can't be dispersed here and there. We need it to be tight knit, and it's happening. The reading clubs are starting all over the place. Soil builders clubs, coffee clubs are happening, and at those points, it's like the center of a bullseye, where you see a group that's gotten together. It just radiates out from that nuclei. And it's something special to see, but it takes a group of people, because this isn't an easy thing to do on your own. To go from full-fledged conventional farming to diving into regenerative practices and changing your mindset, it doesn't take, there's a few early adopters that can, not care about what the neighbors are saying, so to speak, but gosh, it takes a network of people and takes that social support to really get a lot of folks behind this movement.
Yeah, I agree. That's some really good points there. And we've done it on our own farm. We've seeded cover crops for neighbors. We have a roller that neighbors use, and those kind of things. And it kind of helps it, but it takes a while. We're one of those guys, that does all the weird stuff, and
Sure.
kind of prove it out. But then you see others starting to adopt grazing. You see others starting to do more cover crops. So it's great. I'm happy for anybody to copy what we're doing. I mean, it's no secrets out there. Everybody can see what's going on. So I think but you're right. I like your stream analogy. It just takes time to build momentum.
Yeah.
And once it goes quick. So we just need to make sure that we connect with people like you and others on our team and throughout our networks to be able to make sure that we do it right and have as few failures the first time as possible. So
Absolutely.
that's
Document the heck out of it, so that we can experience those growing pains, if there are any, and make that transition a smooth one for the next generation of farmers, or the middle adopters and late adopters that are coming down the pike.
The other thing I contend too is if you just get the information out in front of a farmer, is that and the consequences of what they're currently doing or the benefits of what they could be doing, I think they just innately will choose the right thing. Yes, there's always bad apples in every group of
Sure.
people, farmers or not. But I'm just saying, if you give them the right information, and currently the information is coming from agribusiness, like you were mentioning, ag chem companies. But one of the things that Jonathan talked about was the seed treatments and neonics, and that was kind of precipitated some things there. But just the fascinating to me that the neonic content on one seed of corn can kill, I think he said something like 1.5 million bees. It's just crazy what we're doing, and we got 90 million acres of that out there. So we made the commitment. We've had no neonic seed treatments for 2 years. Yeah, we have some stand issues. We have some wireworm issues. We take a little bit of a yield hit, but I think when you tell a farmer the right thing, it might bug them for a while, as they're pouring it into the planter. And after you do it for a year or two after planter, it's like, I can't do that in good conscience anymore.
Right.
So I think that's important about the work that you're doing.
Yeah. To add on that, just a side note on that, the neonic thing, because it's one of my passions. Toxicology is one of my passions as a researcher. And after doing some research on a farm nearby Ecdysis, one of my good friends, he's part of our Soil Builders Club coffee group, a wonderful thinker and innovator. He, a couple of years back, was the first year he transitioned to naked seed.
And you know how hard it is to find naked seed?
Yeah, you gotta look.
It is a pain to get naked seed, and especially get naked seed in good hybrids. It's a challenge.
Yeah, you ask around early, and it can be done. I think that actually on the Ecdysis website, plug for Ecdysis, we have a database of seed suppliers where farmers can get untreated seed. So if folks are interested, go there. There's a couple other lists that exist out there too. I think maybe PFI, Practical Farmers, maybe has a list too. So there's a couple lists out there if people are, jumping into this blindly. You don't have to jump into it blindly. There's a couple of lists out there of companies that will work with you anyways. And they're pretty extensive lists. So start there. But this friend of mine, Aaron, who is just a fantastic cover cropper, interseeding constantly, non-GMO stuff, just wonderful, pushing the envelope all the time. He said, he was nervous, to buy the untreated seed, but he said it's the best feeling he's had in years pouring seed into the planter.
Yeah,
He said,
and even for yourself, you're not getting it on your hands. You're not breathing it. You're not sitting in it all day long. It's not in your clothes. You're not taking it home to your family. You're not getting it in the family's washing machine. Your kids aren't playing in it. I mean, it's just,
he said,
why are we acceptable having something so toxic?
Right. He said, I wasn't wearing long rubber gloves and glasses and a mask. He's like, I was just out there enjoying the day, pouring in seed, and it just felt right. Follow your gut.
Yep, that's good advice. Any other aha moments that you can think of that just have really stood out to you here in your research that you've done? The neonic kind of hit a little bit of a passion point there. Anything else that you think farmers need to know and keep aware of?
I could talk about specifics and whatnot. I could talk about some ahas I've had in the neonic world. Did some interesting work looking at, I did some work in wheat and sunflowers, and also interseeded cover crops on how long seed treated neonics hang around for. So I would go out there and I would collect plant tissue all summer long from wheat and sunflowers, and clear through, I'll just use sunflowers as the example, clear through anthesis or pollen shed on sunflowers. I could still detect neonics at pretty good levels in the leaf tissue of sunflowers, right through the time of year when those plants are attracting insects like crazy and pollinators just like wild. So that was pretty fascinating. The whole point of having a rate of insecticide on a seed treatment is so that it is diluted or metabolized by the time pollen shed happens, or anthesis. That's what we call anthesis, is pollen shed, because that's a high insect traffic time, and we don't want those insects that are utilizing pollen as a resource to get knocked back by an insecticide. But I found that in our conventional sunflower fields treated with neonics, well, we still are possessing neonics in the plants at that anthesis time of year. Mm-hmm. And maybe even more interesting to me was I did my PhD was looking at the insect community of corn monocultures, and then cornfields that had interseeded a diverse cover crop mixture interseeded at about the V2 to V4 stage, looking at that insect community. And I was out there looking at this insect community. I was like, I had these flax plants were flowering down the center of a canopied corn rows, and field peas were going nuts, and they were getting all sorts of insect attention, which is exactly what I wanted. I mean, I was finding scads more insects in my interseeded cover crop fields compared to the corn monocultures, which is really intuitive, but it was important for me to document that. But I thought to myself, what if these corn plants were treated with a neonic seed treatment? What would happen? Because I'm sure these interseeded cover crops, the roots are going all over the place. I'm sure they're picking up whatever's in the soil water. They're sharing the same rhizosphere as these corn plants. So sure enough, I went out and I collected the interseeded cover crop tissue throughout the whole season in a field that I knew was treated with a neonic seed treatment on the corn. And throughout the entire throughout corn harvest, throughout the entire season until frost, basically into October, I was able to measure very high levels of neonic seed treatment that was treated onto the corn seeds, but had traveled the 15 inches
Mhm.
and was systemic throughout the interseeded cover crop. So it was fascinating. You know, we have to reassess what we're doing on multiple levels when we're switching to a more regenerative model of agriculture. You know, if we're providing homes for insects, are we doing the right thing? Are we doing them a good service if we're also utilizing a neonic seed treatment? Are we providing the well? Are we providing the home? Is that a clean home, or is it a home that has a pernicious amount of a toxin there? Right. So that was a really aha moment for me. And it all stems back to just holistic management. We
Yeah,
can't tweak one little thing on the farm without looking at things in the whole picture, you
right.
know, and that was a great example in my mind.
And I think if you also think about that too, listen to what Mike just said. He said all the way through harvest, he was detecting these levels. And the sad part is that we can see them in subsequent years,
Yeah.
seed treatments. And then the other thing we've done too with these seed treatments is we've gone from the 250 version as the standard and
Yeah.
likely what was being done at the time that you were doing your research. And now today, the 1250 version, 5x the amount, is the standard. So the
Yeah.
persistence is linear there for that. And it's there's a weaning off effect. And one of the things that really another thing got me to switch from neonics was everybody's having problems with slugs and cover crops. And
Sure.
then a researcher out in Pennsylvania, I forget the name right now, did the work finding that the slugs would take up the neonics from the crops, and it would be in their slime. It wouldn't hurt you have to have a different mode of action to kill a slug.
Yep.
But the ground beetles would eat the slug, which is the natural predator for a slug is a ground beetle. They would eat it. They would ingest the neonic, and it would kill the ground beetle.
That's
So
right.
by putting the neonic seed treatment on the corn, now we killed the predators, the beneficials, because ground beetles perfectly fine for corn, and we'd kill that beneficial that was taking out the slugs, and now we got these slug issues everywhere. So cross your fingers. I haven't had any slug issues, but that's
Yeah.
because we're not, hopefully, because we're not using neonics, and we've certainly
Right.
had overwintering volunteer wheat, volunteer rye, those kind of things where we would have a great opportunity for slugs, and we haven't. Now,
Yeah.
armyworm, we've had that, but we haven't had the slug issue. So
So
it's fascinating, all that interconnectedness.
the paper you're talking, the work was done by Douglas and Tooker out of Pennsylvania. Fantastic research, wonderful researchers.
And who
And
would have guessed? Who would have guessed the neonic would be systemic into the slug through its slime and then kill the ground beetle with its neonic infested slime? That's
sure.
a persistent chemistry.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, we're starting to get into research studies now where I saw a paper not long ago about uh, the potential for human health negative effects of neonics because of slug populations increasing to the point where slugs can be a intermediate host for certain parasites like nematodes, protozoans, things like that. And the slug population had increased so much in certain areas of the world um, due to their predators being removed by insecticides that these slug populations are just exploding. And as a consequence of that, the human diseases that are partially carried by these slugs were also increasing significantly too. So you want to talk about multi-layered effects of what we're doing to our soils and our landscapes. We could talk all day. It's so fascinating, but these are things that people ought to realize that one little, bit of powder on a seed seems pretty innocent. And we desensitize ourselves to it. When really we shouldn't do that, right? We really need to highlight, no, like this is not a normal thing. These things that we are utilizing aren't just fairy dust. They're real things that have real impacts on real nerves of real animals and real humans. and there are consequences, and we should all feel responsible for those consequences. And we should know that before, we should be able to swallow that pill, so to speak, when we purchase our seed. And and it sounds harsh, but dang it, we need to hear these things, and we need to be accountable.
We need to take responsibility,
Yep.
not just believe everything that we're told. We need to trust, but verify. And then I think you said it very well there. There's tremendous impacts on that. We're just starting to hear some of the things about glyphosate, and we knew those things 22, 23 years ago is when that was first broke on the scene. The neonic thing, Dr. Lundgren really led the charge on that. And what's that been, 10 years ago? So I mean,
Five to 10 years ago.
there's a certain lag time, but we need to get rid of that lag time, because the unintended consequences that we're going to face as a species,
Yeah.
and if we want to be greedy towards ourselves, let alone everything else on the planet, there's tremendous problems there. So
yeah, and that's okay. Like you said, we need to be sure, if that's what it takes for us to be greedy about preserving the human species. Well, that's okay. That's still, that we're not just talking about bees and butterflies because we think they're beautiful. Like we're talking about ourselves here. And it's okay we need to be selfish.
So quit bitching about the fact that, oh, they're going to take my seed treatment away. No, they're just keeping you from dying. So there you go. Yep. But anyway, no, fascinating discussion here today. Obviously, you can go to Ecdysis, and we're going to have you spell that for all the listeners, because that's a little bit tougher to spell. It's ECDYSIS, correct?
That's correct.
And what is Ecdysis, being for the people who aren't as in love with bugs as what you guys are? Tell us what Ecdysis is. It's kind of like anthesis. It's a big fancy word.
It's a big fancy bug word that when we started Ecdysis, we're looking around for different words to use, and it's kind of a fancy science term, thinking that we're going to be this big fancy research outfit. And turns out we talk to a heck of a lot more farmers than we do other researchers, which is really a good thing. But Ecdysis is, and it's okay. It's good that we all learn new words, and maybe it's better that someone thinks of Ecdysis and it's kind of a head scratcher. So maybe it helps us be remembered a little better. But anyways, Ecdysis is a term for the final molt of an insect. Insects have the skeleton on the outside of their body. They can't grow up like humans do and keep that skeleton inside them all the time, and it grows with them. Their skeleton hardens on the outside of their body. They've got to bust out of it if they want to grow. And that process of busting out of their old skin in order to grow is called ecdysis. So it's pretty symbolic for the work that we're doing, trying to get done. And it's a great term. Yeah, it's a great word for exactly what we do.
It is. And we'll have the links to Ecdysis and also Blue Dasher Farm in the show notes here. Anything else you want us to make sure we include, Mike?
No, I think that we did a great job today. I thank you guys so much for reaching out. Expanding opportunities and educational opportunities, and just opportunities to connect and to create more network connections in this group, in this movement of Regen Ag, is what we need. So we need folks like you having more discussions, bringing more to light, and developing community. That's what we need right now, and you guys are doing a great job of it.
Well, thank you, Mike. I appreciate that, and I appreciate you and the entire team there, and the foundational work that you're doing to make these discoveries that probably aren't always going with the current, and help us to know that there are unintended consequences of what we're doing, but more importantly, looking at things we can do in order to make unintended benefits to what we do. So I'm pretty excited about that, and thank you for your time, and I look forward to continue to working with you and the entire team there at Ecdysis, and thank you so much for everything that you've done.
Can't thank you enough. It's been awesome.
Okay, take care.
It's so much fun to hear the passion Mike and his team have for the work they're doing, and the key factor of being able to quickly pivot to research that is relevant and necessary as they help growers find those concepts, practices, and systems that are scalable and transferable. And as always, if you'd like to learn more about what we're doing to help growers implement the soil health practices, check out our website at asn.farm, and there you can click on links to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. There's a lot of great things happening and always something to learn. Thanks for listening.